Sun shining, Shelby. It ain't raining. Hope everybody's had a good week. Got your grass mowed? Got your gardens planted yet? No, probably not. God takes care of us, don't he? Turn these things down, it's feeding back a little bit. Lord's good to all of us, ain't he? You know, I started out at the post office. A young man was there opening his mail, and I looked at him. I said, he's coming back. He looked very puzzled, looked at me, and he said, who's coming back? I said, Jesus. And he really looked concerned. But you know, I said something to him when I went out the door. I said, you know what? Something good's coming your way. It's not material things. When we witness to somebody, did you know Jesus visits them right then? You ever thought about that? It's not what he's going to come into. Jesus just visited him through us because we're that light, ain't we? We're that light. And when we let it shine, I may never see the man again, but he looked very concerned. He was a young man, had all these locks in his hair and stuff like that. But you know, I go for a while and I don't get to witness somebody. Brother Lawrence, I get a little concerned. Huh? I'm getting a little weak, a little thin. And if I'm somewhere and the Lord puts it on me, then I'm going to witness to him. And he's coming back. You better believe he's coming back. Well, I'm going to get into the lesson here.
One person called us hypocrites Friday, but that was all right. I told him, I said, look how the Lord is persecuted. He said, these church-going people, and he said that meant the hypocrites, and that's whenever Connie rebuked this young man. And I told him, I said, look what we done to the Lord. And I said, we're no better than demons.
Yeah.
Put testimony in your heart.
Yeah.
Let them know that who you stand for. He said, these church-going people, he said, they're nothing but hypocrites.
Yeah. Well, I guess he was speaking about all of them, but they're all not that way, are they?
No, not.
You know, I think in every church, I don't care what kind of denomination it is, I think there's some godly people everywhere that deep in their heart love the Lord. See, God's everywhere. And he's in his people. You know, the government may think they're running the schools and brainwashing our people, but God can send a few Christian kids to school that can turn people's lives around. God's everywhere, ain't he? They've tried their best to do away with it. John Lennon made a bold statement. He said Christianity will fade away. And he said we're more popular than Jesus. Well, that's a pretty bold statement, wasn't it? He's dead. God's still here. Huh? His own worshiper killed him. So who was right? See, the devil's always around, ain't he? Going to talk about that a little bit today. Somebody else got something to say? Y'all done? We're in Luke 24, chapter 1 through 12. Now up on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came into the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. I like this right here. They found the stone rolled away. Supposed to be some guards there, wasn't it? From the sepulchre. Verse 3, and they entered in and found not the body of the Lord Jesus. They've dug around over there in Israel, Brother Junior, and they claim they found his bones, but that's a lie. They won't find his bones. All they're going to do is find some rocks and stones, ain't it? But they won't find his body. And it came to pass, as they were much perplexed thereabout, behold, two men stood by them in shining garments. And as they were afraid and bowed down their faces to the earth, they said unto them, why seek ye the living among the dead? And I guess this next verse is probably one of the greatest ones that we've heard out of the Bible. He is not here, but is what? He's risen. Remember how he spake unto you when he was yet in Galilee, saying, the Son of Man must be delivered unto the hands of sinful men, and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And they remembered his words, and returned from the sepulchre, and told all these things unto 11, and to the rest. It was Mary Magdalene, and Joanna, and Mary the mother of James, and other women that were with them, which told these things unto the apostles. And listen to this right here. And their words seemed as to them as idle tales, and they believed them not. People don't believe today, do they? The Jew that I talked to on the phone, when I said, do you believe he rose from the grave? And I didn't hear nothing else. I didn't even hear his phone click. He told me as a Jew. In other words, he hung up on me. He didn't want to hear that. But these apostles here, they thought he was dead, didn't they? Most likely they were, Brother Junior, they're probably hiding out for their own lives. Norman, we wouldn't have been no different. We would have been just like them. We'd crawled in a hole somewhere and tried to hide. Verse 12, and arose Peter and ran into the sepulchre, and stooping down, he beheld the linen cloths, and laid by themselves, and departing, here he was, wondering in himself at that which was come to pass. Brother Glenn, would you pray over the lesson and pray for the Sunday school teachers this morning? Thank you, Brother Glenn. Do we keep our mind on the Lord all the time? Heard a preacher say this morning that never heard this before, that we have 60,000 thoughts that go through our mind every day. And I heard Cliff this morning talking about a preacher prays 3 minutes a day. No one of the churches is weak. I feel guilty my own self when I remember how my daddy prayed, how the men of old, that one Gideon, two Gideons left High Point to go to, one of them was got to speak in Charlotte. Told you about it before probably. And he asked his buddy, which is a passenger in the car, said, will you pray for me as I speak there today? He said he started praying in High Point, and he ended the prayer when they pulled in the parking lot at Charlotte. Do we come up short? I do. Norman, there's too many things of the world that hinder us, ain't it? You know, this is, we hear this every year about going to the grave, and he's not there, he's been risen, the crucifixion. But you know, I was thinking this week, two of the greatest things that happened on earth was the birth of Jesus and Brother Lawrence, the resurrection. Did you know that Jesus' birth even changed the time from BC to AD? BC was before Christ, and AD is the day of the Lord. He changed everything, didn't he? But yet, the world don't accept the greatest free gift of all. When he died on the cross, when he said it was finished, Brother Junior, he died for the whole world. You know, when I was studying this, I thought of an article I read many years ago. It was from the Duke Divinity School. And it said, they no longer believe in the virgin birth. God help us. How many people sitting on the church pew in churches now that don't even believe in the virgin birth? First of all, they said it's impossible. Well, it is impossible. But then nothing is impossible with God. Is that right? You know what? The devil has always been there. He was there when Jesus was born. And when he heard about him, King Herod was there to destroy him. And he thought he was going to get him, didn't he? But see, God's a little ahead of all of them, ain't he? So he goes out there and has all the boys 2 years and under destroyed to get rid of him. Shelby, I'd hate to be standing at his feet now. His feet's probably still on fire now. His tongue's probably flaming in his mouth. Can you imagine? And I thought about that. I was thinking this week how they slaughtered those little innocent babies and how horrible it was. God help us, look what we're doing. Huh? And they permit it. And I know we stand against it, but you know the devil has always been there. He was there in the Garden of Eden. You ever notice that he didn't go to Adam? He went to Eve. Because he knew he could get Adam. See, he had to get Adam. And he knew that he could get Eve he could get Adam by going through Eve. So that's what he done. Well, I would have never done that. Oh, yes, we would. We would have done the same thing, wouldn't we? The devil was there in the wilderness, wasn't he? When Jesus was carried away in the wilderness, he was there tempting him. The devil is always around, ain't he? You know what? He was there at the Last Supper, wasn't he? You ever thought about it? The Bible says he entered into Judas. The devil's always around, wasn't he? You know, Hilla said something Wednesday night that I thought about this week. He said the devil can dress up like a Christian. Do you know that? He can dress up like a Christian. He's the great deceiver. That's how he works, by deception, by deceiving people. Get you to not believe. You know, I read about a man, Ferdinand de Mera. He was probably one of the greatest deceivers there's ever been in our country. He was an impostor. He was a very intelligent man. He had a photographic memory, but he was so deceiving. His IQ was unbelievable. He even dropped out of school. He could create his own, he could come up with a name and create his own background. This is how the devil works. Create his own background. He was a school teacher. He was a professor in college, had no background of anything, and he could deceive his way in to these places. They said he would set up his own background, and he was so fascinated till people would quickly hire him. He was even a school teacher, but he got caught and pulled 6 months in jail. See, the devil's a great deceiver, ain't he? He went to the army, and he had such a fascinated background till they was excited about it, and he's going to step into an officer. He didn't want to be a private down here. He wanted to be an officer. Well, they told him that it would have to go to Washington, and the FBI would look over everything. When he knew he was going to get caught, he would disappear. He would disappear. You know where he goes? He goes to the Navy. He fooled them too. This is how the devil works. He fools people. He tricked Eve. The devil was there with Job. He was just waiting till God said, you can't take his life. And what he done? He put boils on him from the top of his head. One boil will just about kill you. You know how that is. But this man, Fernando de Mera, he's born in 1921 and died in 1982. He got caught one time and spent 18 months in prison. And he got the idea in prison that he could run a prison. This is a true story. I read all about this guy. So he gets out of prison and he goes to another prison. He creates his own credentials, his background, and all that stuff. They were fascinated to have him. And he come into the prison and was next to the warden. And he was working with the inmates. But one day, a prisoner come in that recognized him. So what did he do? He disappeared. The devil is an imposter. He's a deceiver. So he goes to the Canadian Navy and he gets on a ship, a battleship in the Korean War, as a doctor. And they picked up 19 men in a ship that had been shot up, refugees. So they bring them on the ship. They said, we got a doctor on ship. I'm talking about the devil, how he's a deceiver. He was never been a doctor. He would bring them into the operating room and he'd go in with his photographic memory. He was so intelligent. He'd read up on it and then go in and operate on them. This actually happened. He cured every one of them. They were so fascinated by it that the news interviewed the captain of the ship. His picture got on the front of a major magazine. He got caught. The Canadian Navy was so humiliated that they didn't press charges because they knew that they would have been ridiculed for even hiring a man like that wasn't even a doctor. That's how deceiving some people are. We got them sitting on the church pew. You know, the devil was there when they crucified Jesus. I believe he's waiting by the tomb. You know, I want to read this. I've had it for several years. Now, most of you probably heard it. I like to read it once a year. Sometime I don't, at Easter. But I know I heard it probably 30 years ago. I don't know. And it really blessed me. But if you've never heard it, the title of it is King Death and Father Time. The lesson is talking about Jesus wasn't in the grave, was he? The stone was rolled away, wasn't it? This is what the lesson's about. But I want to read this to you. I know you've probably heard it many times. It says, Father Time met King Death. He was sitting by a tomb. Hello, good friend. I guess you're here to seal somebody's doom. You might say that, Sly Death replied. as a smile came across his face. For inside lies that Jesus man who said he would save the human race. In you, time, why are you stopping here? Don't you have things to do? Oh, I just come each day to draw the veil and let the morning through. Say, death, why are you watching just this one grave with all your vast domain? Looks like to me you would be rambling around smiting folks with pain. Well, this one's something special, for he challenged me, they say. He said he'd lay here just 3 days, then get up and walk away. And I'm the conqueror, you know. They don't talk back to me. When I step in and smite a man, it's for eternity. Then Father Time passed up the hill to cause the sun to rise, and left death standing by the tomb so mighty and wise. The next day time passed again. How are things, he queried. Kind of quiet, old death replied. Well, I'm starting to get a little wearied. But I won't be here when you come by this time tomorrow, for I'm anxious to get on my way to spend more grief and sorrow. But the next day, Father Time passed again and was quite surprised to see old death quivering on the ground in frightful agony. His eyes were cloaked, was mired, and his clothes in disarray. It was difficult for Time to see that old death had had its day. What happened, Death? Asked Father Time. What makes you look so sad? Well, I've never seen you look this way, so weak and oh so sad. Death pulled himself up on a rock. He was looking sick and humble. He hung his head and wrung his hands, and Time could hear Death mumble. I was sitting here at the break of day, just about to take my stroll, when all at once the whole wide world seemed to rock and roll. The stone moved from the door and skipped on down the hill. And all at once everything grew quiet and still. Then I saw him standing in the door. He did not move or speak. And all at once I felt myself becoming tired and weak. Then he came out of the grave, got a hold of me, threw me on the ground. He placed his foot upon my neck. Then he took away my crown. Then he took away my keys and placed him on his side. And now I must go and face old Satan, tell him I lied. For I had made a vow to Satan I would hold him down, but with power like I've never seen, Jesus came forth from the ground. Did you know that death has no power on us? You ever thought about that? When Jesus rose from the grave, we're going to rise someday. Shelby, we may be in the graveyard. Or we may be here, Matthew chapter 24, we may be here when that trumpet sounds. Death had no power over Jesus. Jesus is life. And because of him, Brother Donald, we can live forever. I don't know who wrote that. I've enjoyed it through the years just reading it. time slips up on all of us, don't it? When we leave this body, we're not dead. Shelby, we're still alive. This old body, Glenn, I wouldn't want to take mine with me anyway. I don't like it. I don't like what I do sometimes. When somebody does me wrong or does us wrong, what do we want to do? We want to turn the other cheek? No. I'll get even with them. How dare you do that to me? We're in a body of flesh. But we're not going to take that flesh with us. When Jesus come out of that grave, it changed the whole world. They no longer had to kill the animals like they did. There's a lot of slaughtering going on then. His blood replaced all those animals, didn't it? They no longer had to do that. And his blood is enough to cleanse the whole world. They were against him then. These 11 men were most likely hiding out because they feared for their own life. We would have done the same thing, Norman. We'd have crawled under a rock somewhere to hide. But you know what happened? Jesus didn't even need a door, did he? He just appeared to them. He just appeared to them, Brother Donald. How could people deny that? Over 500 people saw him after he come out of the grave. We see him today through faith. The disciples, they saw him. And yet they failed to believe. Thomas couldn't even believe, could he? He wanted a little proof, didn't he? See, we're living on faith, Brother Donald. And our faith may get a little thin sometime too. I tell you, this is one of the most amazing things that took place on earth. I think one is just as important as the other. The birth of Christ and the resurrection. And it's sad. Did you know that there's